In medieval Europe, justice was often a public spectacle of unimaginable cruelty. Punishments were crafted to inflict maximum pain and humiliation, serving both as retribution and as a stark warning. The gruesome methods employed were as varied as they were horrific, reflecting a society where fear was a tool wielded by those in power. We will delve into the most terrifying punishments of the era, shedding light on a dark chapter of human history that continues to fascinate and horrify us today. The Brazen Bull. At first glance, the Brazen Bull might seem like an impressive work of art. A large, intricately crafted bronze bull standing majestically in the town square. However, this was no mere statue. Originating from ancient Greece and adopted by medieval torturers, the Brazen Bull was an execution device of horrifying ingenuity. The condemned were forced inside the hollow metal structure, and once sealed within, a fire was ignited beneath it. As the flames grew, the bronze heated up, turning the bull into a deadly oven. The victim inside would begin to roast alive, their screams of agony echoing within the metal chamber. Ingeniously, the bull was designed with a complex system of tubes and valves that transformed these screams into sounds resembling an enraged bull. To the onlookers, it appeared as though the statue itself had come to life, bellowing in fury. This method of execution served multiple purposes. It inflicted unbearable physical pain, provided a gruesome spectacle for the crowd, and acted as a psychological weapon. The transformation of human screams into beastly roars blurred the lines between man and monster, amplifying the terror. The Brazen Bull was not just about ending a life, it was about instilling fear, ensuring that tales of its horror would spread far and wide as a deterrent to others. Drawn and quartered. Reserved for the most egregious offenses like high treason, the punishment of being drawn and quartered was a meticulously staged act of brutality. The process began with the condemned being tied to a horse or a wooden panel known as a hurdle. They were then drawn, dragged through the streets to the place of execution. This journey was itself a form of torture, as the victim was jostled and jeered at by crowds, sometimes pelted with rotten food or stones. Upon reaching the execution site, the real horror commenced. The condemned was hanged by the neck but cut down before death could offer an escape. While still alive and conscious, they were subjected to disembowelment. The executioner would slice open the abdomen, removing the intestines and other vital organs, which were often burned before the victim's eyes. This act was both physically agonizing and psychologically devastating. Finally, the person was beheaded, and their body was divided into 4 parts, or quartered. These gruesome remains were then displayed in various parts of the kingdom, on city gates, bridges, or other prominent locations, as a stark warning to others. The head, often dipped in tar to preserve it, might be placed on a spike atop a bridge or castle wall. Notable figures like William Wallace, the Scottish knight who resisted English rule, suffered this fate. His execution in 1305 was intended to crush the Scottish resistance by demonstrating the dire consequences of defying the English crown. The spectacle of being drawn and quartered was designed to obliterate not just the individual, but the very idea they represented. It was a brutal finale that aimed to erase the person's legacy through sheer horror. The rack. Deep within the stone walls of medieval dungeons stood the rack, a seemingly simple device that invoked dread like no other. Constructed of a sturdy wooden frame with rollers at both ends, the rack was designed to stretch the human body beyond its limits. The victim's ankles were fastened to one end and their wrists to the other. As the executioner turned the rollers, the ropes would pull tighter, gradually dislocating joints and tearing muscles. The physical pain was excruciating. Ligaments snapped, shoulders and hips popped out of their sockets, and muscles were torn apart. The sounds of cracking joints and the victim's anguished screams echoed through the damp chambers, adding to the psychological torment. But the rack was not just a tool for inflicting pain, it was an instrument of interrogation. The mere sight of the rack was often enough to induce confessions from prisoners desperate to avoid its torture. It was commonly used to extract information or force admissions of guilt, especially during the Inquisition. The psychological impact of anticipation, combined with the physical agony, broke even the most resilient individuals. Some victims were stretched so severely that they grew several inches in height, only to be left permanently crippled or dead. Burning at the stake. Burning at the stake was a method of execution that combined physical agony with public spectacle, deeply rooted in both religious and legal practices of medieval Europe. Commonly reserved for those accused of heresy, witchcraft, or other moral transgressions, it was a punishment designed to purify the soul through fire while sending a powerful message to the masses. The condemned were typically led to a public square where a wooden stake was set atop a pile of combustible materials like wood, straw, and tar. The individual was bound tightly to the stake, often with chains or ropes that ensured they couldn't escape the rising flames. In some cases, merciful executioners would attach bags of gunpowder around the neck or waist to hasten death once the fire reached them. The crowd played a significant role in these executions. For many, it was a form of grim entertainment, a break from daily life that reinforced social and moral codes. The presence of clergy and officials added a solemnity to the occasion, emphasizing the righteous nature of the act. Sermons might be delivered, warning of the dangers of sin and the necessity of adhering to religious doctrine. One of the most famous cases was that of Joan of Arc, who was burned at the stake in 1431 after being accused of heresy and witchcraft. Her execution not only eliminated a political and military threat, but also served to delegitimize her cause by portraying her as a consorter with evil forces. The Iron Maiden. The Iron Maiden stands as one of the most iconic and terrifying symbols of medieval torture, embodying the era's capacity for inventive cruelty. Shaped like a human-sized sarcophagus, this device was lined on the inside with sharp spikes strategically placed to inflict maximum pain without causing immediate death. The condemned would be forced inside the Iron Maiden, and as the doors closed, the spikes would pierce their body at various points. The spikes were designed to miss vital organs, prolonging the victim's suffering. Trapped in darkness, unable to move without driving the spikes deeper, the individual faced a slow, agonizing death. The psychological torment was as intense as the physical pain, with isolation and the anticipation of death adding to the horror. While some historians debate the actual use of the Iron Maiden during the medieval period, suggesting it may have been a later invention or even a myth, the device has become synonymous with the era's brutal methods of punishment. Its terrifying reputation alone was enough to instill fear, serving as a deterrent to those who might consider defying authority. The Iron Maiden reflects the dark ingenuity applied to torture devices at the time. It wasn't just about causing pain, it was about doing so in a way that was methodical and calculated. The device symbolizes a society where cruelty was institutionalized, and the suffering of individuals was sanctioned in the name of justice or religious righteousness. The breaking wheel. Also known as the Catherine wheel, the breaking wheel was a gruesome method of execution that aimed to destroy the body utterly, leaving it mangled and unrecognizable. The condemned was tied to a large wooden wheel, limbs spread along its spokes or rim. The executioner then used a heavy iron bar or hammer to systematically crush the victim's bones. Starting from the legs and moving upward, each limb was struck multiple times, breaking bones in several places. The blows were calculated to avoid immediate death, ensuring that the victim remained conscious throughout much of the ordeal. In some variations, the executioner would weave the broken limbs through the spokes of the wheel, contorting the body into unnatural positions. After the bone breaking was complete, the wheel with the victim still attached was hoisted onto a pole for public display. Exposed to the elements and scavenging birds, the individual might linger alive for hours or even days. The sight of a shattered body left to decay served as a powerful deterrent, a stark visual reminder of the consequences of criminal behavior. The breaking wheel was often reserved for crimes considered especially heinous, such as murder, robbery, or treason. Its use was widespread across Europe, with regional variations in the method. In some cases, mercy was granted in the form of a final, fatal blow to the chest or throat after the initial torture. Scaphism, death by insects. Scaphism, also known as the boats, was a particularly horrific method of execution that originated in ancient Persia, but became known in medieval Europe through tales and texts. While it's unclear how frequently, if ever, it was actually used during the medieval period, the mere idea of Scaphism was enough to terrify people. The condemned was stripped naked and placed between two hollowed-out logs or boats, which were then sealed together, leaving only the head, hands, and feet exposed. They were force-fed a mixture of milk and honey until they developed severe diarrhea, which filled the enclosed space with excrement. Honey was also smeared on the exposed body parts to attract insects. Left in swamps or under the scorching sun, the victim became a living feast for all manner of insects: flies, maggots, ants, and more. The combination of the excrement inside the enclosure and the honey outside created the perfect breeding ground for bugs. Insects would burrow into the flesh, laying eggs that hatched into larvae, which then fed on the victim's body. Death came slowly, often over several days or even weeks, from a combination of exposure, dehydration, starvation, and septic shock from the constant insect bites and infestations. The psychological torment of being eaten alive added to the unimaginable physical suffering. The Judas Cradle. The Judas Cradle was a diabolical device used primarily during the Spanish Inquisition, reflecting the era's obsession with extracting confessions through extreme pain. The apparatus consisted of a wooden or metal pyramid-shaped seat mounted on a frame. The victim was stripped naked, and their hands and feet were often bound to prevent escape or resistance. Using ropes and pulleys, the executioners would suspend the victim above the sharp point of the pyramid. The individual was then slowly lowered onto it, with the pointed end inserted into the anus or vagina. The process was excruciatingly painful, as the weight of the person's own body caused the point to impale them further. Torturers could manipulate the ropes to raise and lower the victim repeatedly, intensifying the suffering. The ordeal could last for hours or even days, depending on the torturer's intent and the victim's resilience. The Judas Cradle was designed not only to cause intense physical pain, but also to humiliate. The invasive nature of the torture attacked the victim's dignity and privacy, adding a psychological dimension to the torment. Hygiene was non-existent, and the device was rarely cleaned, leading to infections that compounded the agony. The risk of tetanus and other diseases was high, often resulting in a slow death even if the victim survived the initial torture.